This is Judaism Unbound, episode 538, Matir Asurim, Judaism and Incarceration.
Welcome back, everyone. I'm Rena Yehuda Newman.
And I'm Lex Rofberg.
And today, we're continuing our unit on bodily autonomy, speaking with one of the co-organizers of Matir Asurim, the Jewish Care Network for Incarcerated People, which is a network of community organizers, people directly impacted by incarceration, artists, rabbis, chaplains, and healers, all creating Jewish care and providing resources for people who are incarcerated. Today, we're going to be expanding the conversation about incarceration in the Jewish world, whether for those who are incarcerated and those on the outside who have relationships with the carceral system. We're going to talk about the amazing Torah that's being created by Jews behind bars, explore some of the pen pal and even Chavruta study partner programs that are happening with Matir Asurim, and the history of Jewish relationships with prisons and imprisonment, and what that means for self-determination, freedom, and bodily autonomy in the Jewish world today. Before we dive into that conversation, we have a few Judaism unbouncements that we'd love to share with you.
That we do. One big Judaism unbouncement and one smaller one. First, the big one, our certificate program in Unbound Judaism has applications open, but they won't be for much longer. The deadline is coming up on Sunday, June 7th. This episode is being released on June 5th, so you have less than 48 hours to sign up. Don't miss your chance. This is an unbelievable opportunity to dive into Jewish learning and unlearning with Unbounders, Judaism Unbounders from all around the world. It's facilitated by the wonderful Rena Yehuda Newman, co-host of this podcast. They are the director of our certificate program, and you don't want to miss this opportunity. Again, JudaismUnbound.com/certificate is the place to go. And second, maybe you're not looking to apply for our certificate program, but you do want to connect to our work in some deeper ways. Consider joining our Discord server. That's discord.judaismunbound.com. We have all sorts of people from all around the world sharing conversation about Jewish history, Jewish ritual, new visions for the future of Judaism, fun photos of pets. All of that and more is at our Discord, which again is discord.judaismunbound.com. We would love for you to join. We have around 450 members now. We've been going up by the dozen, by the week. So soon we make top 500. Help us get there as we build an incredible digital space of Jewish connection. Rena Yehuda, I'll throw it back to you for the rest of our intro.
Thanks, Lex. And now here's a little more about our guest today. Shir Lovett-Graff is a writer, community organizer, and nonprofit leader working at the intersection of religion, spirituality, and justice. They serve as the executive director for the Attleboro Area Interfaith Collaborative, and they're also a founder and community organizer with Matir Asurim, Jewish Care Network for Incarcerated People. Shir serves on the Senior Advisor Council at Yetzirah, a hearth for Jewish poets, and they're also trained as a mediator, chaplain, poet, and storytelling facilitator. They hold degrees from the New College of Florida and the Harvard Divinity School. Shir, welcome to Judaism Unbound. It's great to have you.
Thank you for having me.
So we wanted to start by exploring with you a particular framework, bodily autonomy, that is the undergirding framework of this unit of episodes. It manifests in a lot of different contexts. We've spoken with folks who explore this as it relates to reproductive justice. We've spoken with folks who explore this as it intersects with trans healthcare and trans justice. And we want to talk with you as somebody who spends a lot of time thinking about incarceration and ask, what even is bodily autonomy? Like, we tend to think about it in ways that might make incarceration feel like not the first place to start. But how might we understand this phrase bodily autonomy in a way where people who are incarcerated actually are a very important place to discuss?
When I think about bodily autonomy in a carceral context, what's coming to me is thinking about time. Ruth Wilson Gilmore, this well-known feminist scholar and abolitionist, talks about how the prison industrial complex isn't actually extracting people's labor, but it's extracting people's time. When I think about bodily autonomy in a carceral context, I'm thinking about the ability of people to use their time in ways that they have autonomy over, and in ways that they don't, and what ways there are for them to self-determine and claim their time as their own when every other part of their life has been stripped from them.
I really like that you used the word self-determine. I have grown interested in the ways that the word self-determine or self-determination, the noun, it's used so much in conversations about nation states. Like, people have the right to self-determination, and the conversation is on the scale of national or ethno-national groups. And it's moved us away from noticing that self-determination, the hyphenated phrase, also operates on an individual level, the ability to determine one's self. The notion of bodily autonomy for me is each person having the ability to name themselves as they understand themselves and have others see that as authentic and true and real. Then there's being able to move oneself in the ways that they want to in the world. Obviously, people who are incarcerated are not able to move wherever they'd like in the world. And so the question of autonomy there becomes part of what we'd want to talk about. And the ability, once you come to those self-understandings, once you have those visions of how you want to be and do in the world, to then go and do it. It's a freedom question. And it's interesting. The word freedom has kind of gotten overtaken by conservative elements of our society in many respects. I find that a lot of people who use freedom are doing so from this vantage point of everybody can kind of just do what they want, including in ways that cause harm to others. I want freedom to still be a word that progressives, that people on the left use. And I think the freedom to move one's body, to name oneself, to operate in the world as one envisions is a way I'd understand bodily autonomy. But Rini Yehuda, I'd love to hear from you, and then we'll go back to Shir.
Shir, I really appreciate the element of time. Judaism is really a religion or a people of time. And when I think about freedom or I think about bodily autonomy, it's a question of space and time. Of, can I take up the space that I need to in order to, as Lex, as you said, to experience freedom? And can I move through time in a way that helps me experience freedom? I'm thinking about Abraham Joshua Heschel right now and thinking about Shabbat as a framework, as a palace in time. And when I think about that in the context of incarceration, there's a real heartbreak in that even the palace in time becomes less possible because your time is stolen away from you. And so I'm curious about what are the Jewish overlays as a religion of both space and time, and in some ways really heavily about the spiral of time. How does that inform your work with Matir Asurim and how you think about incarceration in a Jewish context?
First, I'd like to return to talking about self-determination. I agree with you, Lex, that when we talk about self-determination, at least in this political moment, it's often self-determination in a tribal sense, in a group sense, and there's not always a lot of conversation about self-determination on an individual level. And something that's very true in a carceral context is that people within a carceral system are seen as a group. They are imprisoned, they are prisoners. And one of the only ways that they are individualized within that carceral system is by the crime that they have been accused of, by whatever it is they are in the prison for. With that in mind, something that we see a lot in carceral justice work that intersects with religious and spiritual worlds is that religious and spiritual identity might be one of the only ways that someone can really access a sense of self-determination, to access a positive individual identity that is not the abhorrent individual identity of here is the crime that you have been sentenced for. That is very important to name in terms of the way that the religious and spiritual landscapes operate within a carceral system. One thing that is really important for people in the Jewish world to understand is that religious identity, Jewish identity, looks very different within a prison system because of this lack of self-determination, of this lack of bodily autonomy that people have. That means that when we talk about who is Jewish on the inside or who is looking for Jewish resources on the inside, and when I say inside, I mean people who are in a carceral system. When I say outside, I mean people who are not incarcerated. When we talk about who identifies as Jewish on the inside, people identify as Jewish for many, many reasons. people might identify as Jewish to access a set of material resources such as higher quality food, spiritual companionship, a sense of community, a sense of the divine, a sense of spiritual connectivity. In some ways, many reasons that people on the outside might identify as Jewish, right? For a range of religious, political, socio-cultural reasons. But the material conditions that people on the inside are dealing with are so acute and are so stifling that there's just a wider spectrum of how and why and where and when people identify as Jewish or people identify as someone seeking Jewish resources. And in my organization, Matir Asurim, which means to free the imprisoned, we are very clear that the Jewish resources we offer and provide are open to everyone, whether or not someone is determined as halakhically Jewish by any different set of standards, whether or not someone learned about Judaism for the first time yesterday as soon as they got to a prison or jail, whether someone grew up ultra-Orthodox. And that means that many of the people that we're in contact with might identify as Jewish, they might identify as Messianic Jews, they might identify as Hebrew Israelites, they might identify as Jewish and another religion. The spectrum of Jewish identity on the inside just looks different than it does on the outside. We are trying to follow the needs of the people on the inside to meet them where they're at. And that for us is guided by a set of values, but are open to people and are holding them as part of this wider Jewish community that maybe in an outside context would not be the case.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, by the way, I agree with everything you just said, that there's differences between what Judaism looks like on the inside and outside. I also do think we could do on the outside with more compassion on folks who identify as Messianic Jews, on folks who identify as Hebrew Israelite, on Karaites, on people who identify as Jewish and something else. Like the groups you just named, like sometimes I think if our impulse with folks in a certain context, like those incarcerated, is to have some compassion, that might be a teaching for us in other contexts where we're channeling less of it. Send us the emails if that upsets you. But like I do actually think that we have a problem in many respects, not just in incarcerated contexts. But anyway, I want to talk more about this phrase Matir Asurim, which Matir, there's lots of ways to translate both of these words, but Matir, yes, we could translate it, it's a verb, that's clear. It's a verb, and it means either free, like to make free, or permit. There's a number of slightly different ways. Liberate. All of those could be what Matir means. And Asurim it's often translated in prayer books, because this Matir Asurim, it comes from Birchot HaShachar. It comes directly from a prominent section of the morning service, morning, like that time of the day. And it's usually translated free the bound. We're Judaism unbound. So notions of making that which is bound not bound anymore, making people who are bound not bound anymore, is fundamentally part of like the organizing principle of who we are. And I will acknowledge and admit and be real that like we didn't think much about incarcerated people when we launched this organization. It's not that they were totally absent from our minds, but we chose the name Unbound more metaphorically. It's funny. I've just mentioned before that like self-determination is a word that has become used more metaphorically than literally. Unbound or not bound is often similar. It's used in sort of this generalized abstract sense of free to do things, as opposed to like actually making that which is not free, free. And so Matir, the word for unbounding or making not bound, is really important to us. For me, I walk around every day. My wedding ring has the words of Ana B'Koach, the Friday night prayer, on it, that says Tatir. Tatir and Matir are the same word, just in different Hebrew tenses. And Tatir Tzarura, likewise, is free those who are tangled, or like Tzarura is an interesting word, like that which is knotted, that which is tangled. Again, in like a make liberated sense. we have these notions Friday night, Saturday morning, like it's all over the place. And then a lot of Jews look around and they're like, is incarceration a Jewish issue? Like, this is the group that is most bounded or tangled or not free to do as they do. And as it turns out, a lot of them are interested in Judaism for all the reasons you started to mention. I will shout out, like, hi to those of you who are incarcerated right now and are listening. We are on, Judaism Unbound is in a registry, like it is one of the podcasts that people in prison are able to access. And we're very proud of that and happy about that. And it has led us to a lot of our work. But basically, I want to hear more from you on this notion of Matir Asurim, that is the literal name. Why, whether it's from texts or just Jewish cultural history, why should we care about freeing those who are bound, liberating those who are in prison?
So the first thing I will say is our full name, which is Matir Asurim, Jewish Care Network for Incarcerated People, as we follow the great tradition of Hebrew word English explanation. And one of the pieces of Matir Asurim, beyond working with people who are actively incarcerated at this moment, is also recognizing that incarceration has a wider place in the Jewish world. Something that we've found over the years is our organization has touched not only people who are incarcerated, but also Jewish folks in the outside world who have relationships with the carceral system, either have loved ones who are incarcerated, they themselves are formerly incarcerated, the carceral system has been present in their life, and they have not had a place to say that and to hold that in a Jewish space. There is only one national organization in the United States, Aleph, which really provides a linkage between the Jewish world and the carceral system. We are the only other one.
Which, just to clarify, this is an Aleph that specifically focuses on this. There is also Aleph, the Jewish Renewal Movement. It's confusing.
Yes. Aleph, the organization that I'm referring to, is a Chabad organization that does much work with people who are incarcerated, people who are formerly incarcerated, the families of people who are incarcerated, but they do it through a much narrower lens in terms of who is identifying as Jewish, who they allow to access their resources. And one of the reasons that Matir Asurim came about is because there's this whole swath of people looking for Jewish resources who could not access those resources. And when the chaplain or whoever they were interfacing with in the prison system was trying to get resources, the only resources they had were these more prescriptive Orthodox resources. Those resources are certainly deeply valued by many of the folks that we work with. And also there was a need and a desire for other kinds of resources, and resources particularly coming from an abolitionist and liberatory framework that met people where they were at, both in terms of their Jewish journey and also brought an opening of relationship between people on the outside and people on the inside. One of the pieces of our work is having a pen pal program, which matches people who are incarcerated with people who are not incarcerated. For some of those people, they are chavruta, and they study together, and they write beautiful Torah together. For others, they're just pals. They maybe write once a month, just, how are you? How are you doing? Just someone to check in on. We've also had a beautiful pen pal relationship in which one of our pen pals helped facilitate and put together a marriage ceremony for two people who were incarcerated, two women who wanted to get married, and we connected them with a pen pal who helped write a kind of wedding ritual that they could do that would feel meaningful for them.
That's beautiful. Shir, I love hearing about the different kinds of Judaisms that are happening on the inside. And in Judaism Abound, we talk a lot about this idea of like, let 1,000 blossoms bloom. We actually need all of these different kinds of Judaisms in order to make it into the next Jewish future, which is our 501c3 nonprofit name. That there's this sense that we actually have to be doing all different kinds of innovations. And when we talk about truly underrepresented Judaisms, The work that Aleph is doing is important, and it misses an enormous population of Jews who are a part of that innovative tradition. And I really appreciate you bringing up the ways that there are so many Jews who feel like there is no room for them within mainstream Jewish society to actually talk about what the impact of that has been on their lives. The mainstream Jewish world might assume that, oh, there would be nobody in the room who would either be formerly incarcerated, who may have incarcerated loved ones, who may have an interaction with the prison system. This is a part of the Jewish world, and I want to talk specifically about the fact that not only is it currently a part of the Jewish world, Judaism has a long history with prisons. Because it turns out when you're a minority religion under authoritarian landscapes, especially when we're talking about Ashkenazi history and the Pale of Settlement, everyone was going to jail all the time. And the Hasidic movement specifically, it was in many ways a spiritual and political insurgency. And there's so much Hasidic folklore about the experiences of Jews either inside the system or people who were going around constantly to raise money for bail. I'm thinking right now about a story of two famous rabbis who are brothers, Reb Zusha of Anipol and Reb Elimelech. And the two of them are opposites.
Of Lezhensk. Let's give Lezhensk its
due. Yeah. Of Elimelech of Lezhensk. Thank you very much. Zusha of Anipol is always a little easier for me to remember somehow. And Zusha is an ecstatic figure. He finds a way to laugh even in the worst circumstances. Elimelech is the exact opposite. He is dour, he is dire, and he suffers with the way that his Hasidim, the Jewish world around him, suffers. And so one day they're walking and, two Cossack guards see them and throw them into jail. And Elimelech begins to weep. And Zusha turns to his brother Elimelech and he says, "Why are you crying?" And Elimelech says, "We're trapped in here and we have no way of getting out and no one even knows that we're here. And to make matters worse, there's a toilet in our stall. And so we can't even daven, we can't even pray because halachically, according to Jewish law, you can't pray in a room where there's a toilet." And he starts weeping because there's a chamber pot there. And he says, "We can't even pray." And Zusha stands up and he takes his brother by the hand and he starts dancing. And he says, "If we can't pray, then we should dance." And so they're dancing and dancing around the chamber pot. And, Elimelech's tears are, he's starting to laugh because of the absurdity of the situation. And, Zusha's having a great time because he manages to find the joy in everything. And suddenly one of the non-Jewish guards looks at these two Jews dancing around a chamber pot. And he goes, "Well, if the toilet's giving you so much joy, you don't even get to have a toilet." And he goes in his stall and he unlocks it. And he takes the chamber pot and he throws it out of the room. And then Zusha turns to Elimelech and goes, "Now we can pray."
That is a wild story.
Right. And there are a lot of criticisms you could make in the story. There are a lot of epiphanies that come with the story, and I think I feel careful about the way that folklore may even glorify or valorize experiences of joy or suffering that might be happening inside of a carceral system. But it does actually highlight something that you're saying about the uniqueness and in some ways the radical beauty and innovation of the kinds of Judaisms that are happening inside of a carceral system. We have so many stories and we have an incredible and frankly tragic history of the ways that Jews have had to interact with prisons and jails under regimes that were hostile to us. And that is a part of our canon. And it's something that actually we should resuscitate as a part of our canon, understanding that there's a great deal of continuity in the work that Matir Asurim is doing right here today.
Yeah, I know that I've been working in abolitionist spaces for too long because when you were sharing this story, I got very concerned that they wouldn't have access to the chamber pot itself because I'm thinking about the very real conditions that people are dealing with of not having access to things like toilets. And also, I love that story. It's so beautiful and feels like a fairy tale. If you wish it, it will come true. Feeling that, holding that. Last year, Matir Asurim did a collaboration with Shalmala Yeshiva, and we led a class called Torah from the Inside Out. It was a very innovative experiment in which we did text study on Zoom, and we invited people who had pen pals that were incarcerated to bring the learnings from our Zoom discussion back to their pen pals to talk about it, and then to bring those learnings back to our Zoom, creating a cross-carceral online learning space, which, as far as I know, has never been done before. And the first texts that we started with were two stories of Jewish incarceration, the story of Joseph and the story of Rabbi Akiva. And it felt really important to start with those stories, almost to land us in a place of recognizing these spiritual ancestors who had deep experiences with the carceral system, with carceral systems of their time, and to name them as spiritual ancestors for us, people who are not incarcerated, and also for our incarcerated pen pals and loved ones. And to say, look, this Jewish world that we are building across bars, across prison walls, has always existed. Those are part of our spiritual legacy. How can we not include them when we think about the Jewish world? How is it that the modern, progressive Jewish movements have not seen incarcerated Jews as part of their Jewish communities? That's one of the things that we are trying to bring forward as Matir Asurim, is to say our incarcerated community members have great Torah to share, and we want to bring their Torah into the light. And not only do we want to bring their Torah forward, we want to be in conversation with them. We want to create anew. We want to create relationships. We want to create new Torah that comes from these cross-carceral relationships, also recognizing that any of us could be incarcerated. Any of us could have an interaction with the carceral system. And of course, that is deeply influenced by race and class and gender and ability. And also, it is possible for any of us.
I'm grateful to you bringing in Joseph and Rabbi Akiva. This topic is right there in front of us in Jewish tradition, and we don't name it as such. Right? Like the part of the story where Joseph is in prison, by the way, for a crime he didn't commit, which people who did commit crimes also deserve all the same resources like Matir Asurim as those who didn't. But that is what happens in that story. That part is kind of like the way it's taught. It's like, oh yeah, Joseph went down to Egypt and there was all this stuff, and then he's in prison quick, and he has these conversations with a couple others in prison, and then he's put in power, and the story proceeds from there. We've got one of ours in the king's palace now, rah rah, and I don't think it's an interlude. I can't prove it, but I think we are meant to consider, as you just said, that we could be that incarcerated person. They're not external to us. I think a lot of, certainly how I was inculcated as, a white and Jewish and suburban liberal person, but not necessarily like a radical person, was like, yeah, care about people who are incarcerated, but like they're not of us. They're like, that was never said in that way, but like, they were always they. It was always like, this is people that are objects of our caring or recipients of our kindness. They're not they're not partners of us. They're not our pen pals. They're not people that we collaborate with, do art with, create with. And look, maybe some of that is just like practically we and people who are incarcerated are in different places, and so like when you talk about them you say they, but like I don't know that it's just practical. I think there is a little bit of an ideological statement of we help those people, but we aren't ourselves those people. I'll be totally honest and say that for me, so much of this changed once I actually had people in my life who had names and faces that I could look at and say, oh, this is a person that I care about, that knows about me or cares about me, and that we actually have a shared project together. And that happened through Tales of the Unbound. That happened through the first season of a show that Miriam was the host of, Miriam Turlinchamp, our executive director. Josh and Ari were people that had been in touch with our organization. They're part of how we learned that we were in that directory of podcasts. But like they are two people who care about our work, who have become partners, have become unbounders in doing our work. And since then, there's been more. And I guess I want to hear more from you on the theying piece of this, the ways in which even well-meaning, even progressive Jewish communities and interfaith communities and broader communities tend to make those who are incarcerated a them as opposed to part of the constellation of partners and collaborators that is doing work together.
One of the things that we haven't talked about is abolition. And I'll get to your question by talking about abolition. Abolition is the recognition that the systems that we have to address harm do not, and in fact, they perpetuate harm, and that abolition is the invitation to take down these systems, to dismantle these systems, not just of prisons, but of policing and of carceral logics embedded in our schools and hospitals and other spaces, and to invite us into imagining something new. One of the invitations for me of a Judaism reckoning with abolition as a theology is a Judaism that reckons with the idea that each of us individually and collectively can be harmed and can harm others. In this year, 2026, 5786, but in this time, who better knows that than the Jewish people? Who better knows that than the Jewish people? That we have the enormous capacity to be harmed and to create enormous harm. One of the dismantlings of this binary between us and them is also the dismantling of this binary between victim and perpetrator, this binary between the person who did harm and the person who was harmed, because all of us have the capacity to hold all of that. And to me, that actually is a part of B'Tselem Elohim, that we are created in the image of God. We can do harm and we can be harmed. We can enact violence and we can have violence enacted upon us. So theologically, there's this opportunity for us to move into a Jewish future that reckons with abolition. I call it a transformative Judaism, taking the language of transformative justice. When I think about what the Jewish world needs to enter into a future of repair and of responsibility, I see it as an abolitionist future.
In the last couple of years, something I've become pretty fond of saying is that I think one of the greatest contributions that the Jewish people has to the collective family of humanity is the understanding that we are both the destroyer and the destroyed. And if we're worth our salt, right? If it's worth it for us to keep staying around, that Torah has to become so essential to who we are right now. Like really, really right now in this moment in 5786, in 2026, whatever calendar you use. What stands out to me in your definition is that abolition is teshuvah. Teshuvah, repentance, repair, or returning. The idea that we can always do teshuvah. And in fact, actually, we always must do teshuvah. And the prison industrial complex is actually not interested in teshuvah. It may at sometimes posture as though it's about the quote unquote Department of Corrections. Teshuvah is not a correction, it's a transformation. I think a lot about in the Talmudic history of the halachic legal system, the Jewish legal system, there's no word that translates to criminal. There's a word for thief, right? There's a word for murderer, right? We have words that describe specific actions, but we actually don't categorize people based on the fact that they broke a law, quote unquote, in a broad sense. And we understand that that's not who the person is. It may be something that they did, and there may certainly be context as to why they did it. But we don't do this sorting mechanism of us and them, of somebody who is in violation of a law, therefore exists in a completely other category. Thinking about halacha as a legal system, it's like, okay, so everyone who's ever ate pork is a criminal? We don't relate to the system that way. But I think about my own experiences interacting with people on the inside, especially as collaborators. I did a pen pal program myself through Black and Pink when I was in high school, which is an amazing queer organization that pairs up folks on the outside with queer folks on the inside. And I also think about my former housemates. I used to live with a group of amazing musicians, one of whom, named Michael Janice, was really involved in a lot of abolition work and is a professional composer and is in contact with somebody named Wayland, who is himself a brilliant composer who's currently on the inside. And I remember sitting in the living room, gathered around our piano, and Michael would co-compose with our housemate Sam and with Wayland on the phone. And Wayland would dictate different musical pieces that he'd written on the inside that he was audiating. He wrote down in notation he could hear in his head. And we would play out the music while on the phone with Wayland. And really thinking about, Shir, how beautiful it is that Matir Asurim facilitates opportunities for chavruta and for collaboration, and how necessary this Torah is, and wondering how much the Torah of the inside is actually part of the teshuvah of the world right now. These questions feel so relevant in this moment, especially where the threat of carceration and incarceration is ever present. So I'm curious, Shir, tell me about teshuvah, tell me about abolition. What do you want our listeners to know, especially those who have never really considered the link between those things?
It's a beautiful invitation. And the reality is we have many technologies embedded within Jewish tradition to navigate harm, including teshuvah, including tochacha, which means kind of a rebuke. And there are wonderful rabbis and scholars writing about this, like Rabbi Danya Rutenberg, Rabbi Ari Lev Fernari, writing about how teshuvah can work in practice to address harm on an interpersonal level, on a communal level, on a structural level. Those are technologies that are embedded in our tradition. And there's many rabbis who have written about how does teshuvah work and what are the rules of teshuvah. I actually have a magnet on my fridge that an old boss of mine gave me of the steps of teshuvah. I can't say what that means about our relationship, but I'm glad that I have it. One of the questions that comes up for me as a person who both has a foot in the Jewish world and in the interfaith world and has training in both landscapes is religious worlds helped build the carceral systems that we navigate. The Quakers more or less created the groundwork for solitary confinement, which is one of the most evil pieces of the American carceral system. What responsibility do we as religious actors have to remake these systems? And what are the technologies, the resources that are already embedded in our traditions that we can systematize in a positive way to deal with harm?
I love the we of religious actors, religious doers. It's not a we that I think Jews use enough. I think we use the Jewish we a lot. We use a sort of transpolitical Jewish we that is like all Jews across whatever identities. And, Rini Yehuda and I have talked about this a lot. That's part of my criticism of pluralism. But like the we of people anchored to religious traditions across difference is a powerful we. It's one that played a pivotal role in the mid-20th century civil rights movement for Black Americans, led by a reverend, Martin Luther King, partnering with many other reverends and pastors and ministers and rabbis, imams. Like this is a really powerful group because, as it turns out, story matters, and anchoring good works, to use a term we more think of in a Christian context, but anchoring good works on ancientness makes a difference. It actually hits for people. I don't know. That was a little bit of a sidebar, but I wanted to bring that in. The question I want to bring, it's a little disagreement, but not really. So I'm going to say to Rini Yehuda, I do think that there is a word, not for criminals, but I think there is a word that matters to this conversation from Jewish tradition. It's not used very much, but it's used in one prominent spot, and the word is avaryanim. In the little preface to Kol Nidre, to the moment on Yom Kippur evening where vows are nullified, there's this sentence that says, by heavenly authority and with permission of this human community, and then the Hebrew is anu matirin lehit palel im ha'avaryanim. We hereby permit, matirin, it's that matir, tatir. We hereby permit, I wasn't thinking about that. We hereby permit, liberate you to pray with the avaryanim, with the transgressors. I'm bringing this up because there is a word, I'd argue, for those who sin, those who transgress. But the biggest, most prominent instance of it is when we're actually saying that group is part of us. That group is in the room. And I've made a past argument on the podcast that I wasn't thinking about in a carceral context. But in Hebrew, im ha'avaryanim, the word im is ayin mem. that it is permissible to pray with transgressors, it can also be read, it's the same word as am ha'avaryanim. You are hereby permitted to pray, comma, people of transgressors or people of transgressions, which is saying that that's what we are. It's saying we're both the harmer and the harmed, right? Or at least it's saying we're the harmers. And so I bring that in not to be like, oh, Rini Yehudi, you're wrong, but to get at, okay, we do have categories for transgressors, but it tends to be that our tradition names the ways in which we can be part of that group. So might that be part of this equation as well?
And how clear it is that when it's saying that we can pray with the transgressors, it's saying we are all the transgressors. When we do the Ashamnu, the end, that is a plural ending. And we say it, we have done these things, including listing things that maybe you personally did not do.
I also want to point to how different the transgression, the transgressors is than the criminals, the people who have transgressed. It's a person first. I know that we're talking in translation here, and it is using person first language. It is not talking about the criminals. It is talking about the people who have done something, but they exist as people beyond that which they have done, and they will exist as people into the future. And to transgress, too. I'm curious, what does transgression mean in that context? How do you see transgression as different than the crime? To me, a transgression means transgressing on the values of the community, but that implies that the community exists, that there are shared values held amongst the community, that people have the resources to identify those shared values, and people have the resources to identify when those shared values have been transgressed upon. And that too feels like a part of it, that the vision of an abolitionist world, the vision of an abolitionist Judaism is one in which we have communities that can recognize our shared values, and we can recognize when those shared values are transgressed upon.
Transgression does have the side of it that is people who have done bad, right? Like that is part of what transgression means. But it's very common in English for people to claim the word transgression and say, yeah, we are transgressive. It's more common as an adjective. Like, this community I'm part of wants to be transgressive because we think that the values of the broader society in some respect aren't right. And so to be Am Ha'avaryanim, to be a people of transgression, is actually to say we are a people that looks around and tries to identify what are the values of our society that need to be dismantled, upended, transgressed.
I like talking about etymologies here too, because at least in the English language, right, transgress, it's a Latin root, and I for our listeners out there, I studied Latin for 7 years, so I'm a big ancient languages nerd.
Ooh.
And it's fun fact: transgress, trans, the prefix trans, literally means to go across. So when we're talking in a gender sense, right, trans and then cis, these are two Latin prefixes that mean on across from, or cis on the same side of. Trans implies that there's a movement, there's a crossing of somewhere. And the second part of the word, gress, it comes from a Latin word which is to go or to leave. Transgression has this real negative connotation, but the etymology of the word is just essentially to cross a boundary or to move past something beyond what a set limit was. It feels like it works better than the word criminal in at least an abolitionist framework, because the idea is, Shir, as you said, there is a community that has certain agreed upon norms and ideals about how we want to treat each other. And that somebody who's transgressed is somebody who's gone outside of that shared contract that we have with one another. But it doesn't imply that somehow they can never return. It doesn't imply that somehow that means that they are completely separate and now we have no association with them. Part of what I love about the word teshuva, especially when we translate it as return, is it's about that sense of coming back inside of the reach of the community so that we can rejoin the part of us that feels like it's been put into exile beyond those boundaries. And if we're talking about exile and exiling either a part of yourself or a person experiencing literal exile from a broader community, I really don't know what could be more Jewish than that.
Exile is actually a part of it. It's actually a part of the teshuvah process. Part of practicing teshuvah is this invitation to enter exile, to have time for contemplation and internal repair before doing that communal repair. But it's not a forever exile. There's still an opportunity to come back into the community and to do that repair. Being in the wilderness, navigating this landscape of harm and repair and healing is not an easy one. And it's not one that just happens. Wandering is a part of it. And we're in the season of wandering and recognizing that that is a sacred space. It is a space to connect with those parts of us that need repair, that need time, that need healing. To me, what an abolitionist Jewish future offers us is an invitation to find safety in relationships and to find that both in a relationship with ourselves, with the divine, with friends, family, and community, and to have some guarantees that those relationships will not be cut off because we transgress, because all of us are capable of transgressing.
This is so live. It makes me think about also, as we're considering different etymologies, Ivri. This is a rare instance in which the Latin etymology actually lines up with the Hebrew etymology. Ivri, which is the name for the Israelite people before we become the Jewish people, is a boundary crosser.
And it's from that word avarian, or it relates to that word avarianim, the avar, the ivra, those parts. Yeah.
And it relates to this idea that going beyond the boundaries, whether negative or positive, is a part of this experience of transformation and growth. And what are the things that we need for transformation and growth? We need art. We need poetry. I mean, Shir, you are an artist and a poet in addition to someone who is doing incredible abolitionist work. I'm curious, as a closing note, when we're talking about teshuvah, when we're talking about abolition, what does the human soul need in order to do those things and those motions? And what are the ways in which people who are both on the outside and the inside engage in that in a way that creates more tikkun, more repair?
There is no other answer than connection. The work that we have to do is to ensure that people can be connected to themselves, to whatever feels meaningful in the spiritual sense, to people who are capable of facilitating transformation, who have the capacity to facilitate and support transformation, and ideally, if possible, to the people who have been harmed. The carceral system is deeply invested, is built on cutting people off from the relationships that are really the space in which the divine dwells.
Thank you so much, Shir Lovett-Graff, for joining us. This has been a fantastic conversation.
Thank you so much.
And thanks so much to all of you out there for listening. We hope you've enjoyed this conversation, and we hope that you'll tune in again in the future. As we close, a reminder, our certificate program in Unbound Judaism in the Unyeshiva. We have applications open for a new cohort, but if you want to apply, the deadline is rapidly approaching. This episode is being released on June 5th, and the deadline is June 7th. So head to JudaismUnbound.com/certificate to get the application materials you need, and consider signing up for this immersive, digital, incredible cohort where you can connect with people all around the world through a lens of Unbound Judaism. You can take our courses. You can create an incredible capstone project. This is an incredible opportunity. Don't miss the chance to apply. Again, JudaismUnbound.com/certificate. The deadline is in just a couple days as this episode is being released. And then, of course, as we close, we really love hearing from all of you. So if you listened to this episode and it gave you some questions to ask, visions for the Jewish future, disagreements with me, Irina Yehuda, or Shir Lovett-Graff, be in touch with us. You can do so in any of the following ways. First, there's our Facebook and Instagram handles. Both of those are at Judaism Unbound. Second, there's our website, JudaismUnbound.com, where you can find show notes for this episode and all sorts of other juicy goodies. Third, you can email us at hosts, HOSTS, at JudaismUnbound.com to send a note to both Rini Yehuda and me. We are also deeply appreciative if you're interested in supporting us financially, which you can do on either a monthly recurring basis or via a one-time gift by heading to judaismunbound.com/donate. So thank you so much for listening, and with that, this has been Judaism Unbound.